Hello, Magic in the Room listeners. Hannah here. And this week I got to pick one of my favorite episodes from this year to share with you. It was kind of a hard task for me because there's a lot of favorites and I have a hard time sometimes narrowing things down. But I chose to highlight and replay for you episode number 103, Social-Ecological Systems with Dr. Brooke Lahneman. Brooke is a professor in management at Montana State University, and her research focuses on sustainable business practices. What really impacted me in this episode, and one of the reasons it's one of my favorite, is this idea of using nature as a model for organizational development and growth, for performance practices, for long-term strategy. There's a lot of models that are, organic, nature-based models that are circular. So Brooke kind of breaks down what a social ecological system is. It's really taking a systems approach, a systems view of organizational life and looking at, all parts of our business practices, right? How sustainable are they, not just for our short-term growth, but for the long-term impact that we have. So if we want to be a purpose-led, impact-oriented company, what are some of the things that we should consider? And what are some of the reasons this really matters, right? People care. And as a professor in business school, Brooke gets to teach the future business leaders of our country, and they are passionate about these types of issues. So in order to not just attract, but also retain top talent, we have to align our organizational values with the values of the types of employees we want to have in our company, right? And these are things that the coming generation, the existing generation, but the generation that is in college or going through education system right now and that are going to be entering the job market, are entering the job market and are beginning to take on leadership roles in companies. And these are things they care about. And so the more we can focus on aligning our organizational values with the values of our employees and our team members, and create that shared purpose and that alignment between values and strategy, we're going to see higher performance outcomes, better financial outcomes, and certainly better people outcomes.
Magic is found in every room, where people connect over a shared purpose. In this weekly podcast, Luke, Hannah and Chris explore the role of purpose, courage, mindset and culture in every leader's quest for transformational performance.
Hello and welcome to Magic in the Room. I'm Luke Freeman.
And I'm Hannah Braderud. And today we are back here in Bozeman, Montana, recording in my home state. I'm so excited. And I get to introduce a very dear friend, Brooke Lahneman, who is a business professor at Montana State University. She has a PhD from the University of Oregon, her MBA from ESADE Business School in
Barcelona,
Spain, and a BA in economics from the University of Virginia. So you've been all over the world. And Brooke, tell us about what is your current research interest and what led you down that path? How did you get interested in your topic?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. It's nice to be here. I became interested in the idea that businesses are the biggest problem, one of the biggest contributors to problems for climate change and social injustice.
Yeah.
And so actually, one of the best places to work to solve those problems. And I can come back to that. But when I was studying economics in my undergrad degree, I was able to go to Spain for a study abroad and had traveled a bit before that, but that was really eye-opening to go live in another country for a little while and travel around Europe from there and just see how, different people are and cultures are from place to place, but also how similar we are from place to place. And that we're all dealing with these issues in climate change. And actually, traveling opens your eyes to social injustice, poverty, even more so because we're lucky to live in the United States. And so, I returned to school, finished my degree and thought, okay, economics is fine, but I want to do something. I want to go work for a company and I want to have a positive impact. So of course I took like 4 years and just did random things, took random jobs and figured out life in the DC area. And then I did go get my MBA in Spain. And that was really life-changing for me because I thought I would go become a consultant, which would be great and fine. But I chose that program because they had a track in strategy and corporate social responsibility.
Cool.
And that just opened my eyes to really what, we have some tools, but we need to develop more. And how cool would it be to be a professor in a business school teaching students that we can be doing business in this positive way. One person in one company can have a really big effect. This was back in 2009. There weren't a lot of jobs in sustainability at that time. If I'd graduated now, I might have gone a different route. I don't know. But back then I thought, okay, if I really want to have a multiplier kind of impact, then I need to be in business school teaching future business leaders about, how businesses can actually resolve a lot of the problems that historically they caused. So corporations have so many resources. I mean, I think, I'm trying to remember the company, maybe Apple, it's like gross income or, in this, is, I think profit is like greater than the GDP of some countries.
Wow.
And, and they have access to suppliers and they have upstream and they have access to consumers downstream. And so there, if Apple, which Apple has actually become quite sustainable, think about the ripple effects that one company can have and if they decide to put their massive resources behind it. So that's kind of where my passion came from. I decided that I wanted to be an educator and I wanted to teach business school students and I wanted to be a contributor to thinking about the new ways, like contributing to developing those new tools that we still needed to have.
I love that. And you've since published a lot. You have some recent articles. You want to share a little bit about some of your recent publications?
Sure. Yeah. My
applicable to this topic.
Yeah. Most of my research is. So I tend to look at inside organizations kind of at the business level. How can they organize to be more sustainable? So looking at it from a formal and informal point of view. So literally structures and business models. I research social enterprise. And so recent publications in that area have been actually around where social enterprise locate matters for how well they do on all of their performance metrics. So not just financially, but because they have to do well financially to survive and deliver on their social and environmental goals. But there are communities that are more supportive of these non-traditional ways of organizing, more so than others. And
So tell us, and just, I want to define for listeners, like what is a social enterprise and what are some of the hallmarks of what makes it different from traditional enterprise?
Yeah, a social enterprise, the easiest way to describe it is it's a for-profit company that has a more of a nonprofit oriented mission. So instead of being a nonprofit, so maybe it's social equity goals, maybe it's environmental mitigation or, risk management goals. And instead of using a funding model like a nonprofit would use, where they're relying on donors, and actually quite a few of their employees are dedicated to raising those funds, they adopt a for-profit business model and use the revenue to support their mission. So it's self-generating. They can, they have to develop a product or service just like a company would have to. But they reserve a certain amount of that profit to feed back into its mission. So really popular example that I think a lot of people, actually, I'm wearing Tom's shoes right now.
That's funny. I was going to ask you, Tom's shoes, right? That was kind of.
I'm wearing those right now.
Yeah.
That's an example of a socially oriented social enterprise, meaning they make shoes and they make shoes in an environmentally sustainable way. But if you look at their mission is to improve impoverished communities around the world. So they commit to diverting a certain amount of their profit to these communities in need, and they support foundations there.
Yeah.
A lot of the strategies that social enterprise will adopt is just having nonprofit partners they work with. So that's kind of it's a great complementary relationship.
Yeah, it's similar to Patagonia.
Yes.
And I recently read Yvon Chouinard's book, Let My People Go Surfing, which is a phenomenal, both autobiographical origin story of Patagonia, but also really about how to create a purpose-led company that has a social mission, like what you described, right? And so their social mission is, I don't know if I can state it accurately, but it's about sustainability and creating more, sustainable manufacturing, and they support certain nonprofits, right? So they try to use materials that are, socially, environmentally friendly, and but yeah, I love that book and that story. I use it a lot in our work when we demonstrate, what is a shared purpose. We talk a lot about purpose. We're purpose and performance group, and so we believe that having a purpose that lives independent of your profit goals, like you may have profit, you have to make a profit to survive, like you said, but we look at profit as an outcome rather than as a goal in and of itself.
Yeah.
And it starts with that purpose aligning around values for the internal organization, but bigger than that, what is the impact that we're here to make? And I think that's what gets people excited to work for companies.
Yes, I have a current study on B Corp certified companies, which is the certification that certifies a social enterprise business model. So any company from any industry can become a B Corp if they meet the certain minimum requirements.
Okay.
And I do qualitative research, so I just talk to people. I talk to 55 B Corp owners and managers. And the patterns that came out of the analysis were, at first this was really hard, but once we, because you're trying to compete against profit maximizing firms while trying to, and fulfill your purpose, have your impact, and using your profit for that, of course. But they find that the more they lean into their purpose, the more they lean into their impact, actually the profit just follows. And so instead of thinking about them like, I need to make my profit and I need to do my purpose, it's like, if I'm really doing my purpose part right, then I'm actually, the business does well. Consumers align, like consumers that align with your purpose want to buy your product.
We attract what we believe, right?
Yes,
if we're clear about what we believe, we'll attract other people who believe that.
And they also talk about, we find the right employees who are passionate to work and find meaning and impact in their own jobs working for our company. And that's like, invaluable. Lowers turnover, you get more satisfied, more loyal employees who really put in a lot of effort. So, I mean, it's win-wins
So I'm curious as we talk through this, we've given a couple examples, but what I'm starting to picture as I listen to you talk is this continuum of social enterprise on one end, maybe like Tom's, and maybe there's something further along than Tom's, but let's just use Tom's at one end, and Patagonia's maybe a little bit further along the continuum or closer to strictly commercial since they don't do a one-for-one. I don't know, maybe they go all the way to the end like Tom's. You're the expert, so you tell me. And then we have traditional, corporate life, maybe traditional publicly traded corporate life that maximizes profits on the other end of the spectrum. But tell us a little bit about the different places on that spectrum that organizations could land. And where I'm going with this is a lot of the folks listening, and most of the folks that we work with, on a consulting basis, we're talking about this journey of moving a little bit along the continuum towards being a more socially responsible, typically focused on employee well-being, having a shared purpose that folks align around, aligning all of our people practices around shared purpose. So all of those things are essentially moving along the continuum a little bit. But I'd love to hear for you, like, how do you see that continuum, and maybe other examples of organizations that land somewhere along it?
Yeah. Well, there is a big spectrum, actually. And a lot of companies, publicly traded corporations, will just start there, tend to inhabit the other end of the spectrum than, let's say, Patagonia or Tom's Shoes. And in part, it's because Patagonia is privately owned. I think Tom's is. I would have to confirm that. But the publicly traded companies are beholden to shareholders. So, it's not necessarily that they're evil. It's just that they have a lot of people to answer to. And they tend to be larger and more moving parts and bigger profits and, more interaction with regulators. So it's not to say that some of those publicly traded corporations can't, I think there are quite a few in the middle. So public versus private ownership is a big kind of stick in the mud, I guess you would say, to have to really, I think we're seeing some companies try to make that shift. And I can talk about that later if you want. But I think in my class, my sustainable business class, I went looking for, I'm going to look for a really good sustainability report from a corporation that's doing a great job. And I'm going to look for what looks good as a sustainability report, but like when we really look at it, the company's not really doing very much, and they're really just maximizing profit at the expense of our well-being, nature's well-being, et cetera. And of course, I fell upon a lot of fossil fuel, petroleum companies, mineral extraction companies. They're just very, very, they're literally taking large amounts of things out of the earth and creating lots of carbon, and it's very dangerous work for the people involved. And usually they're in developing countries where workers don't have as many rights. So it's just this, combination of complex variables that sets them up to how do you start to change any of that? You have this supply chain that's in place, very hard to reconfigure that. I think a lot of companies are in motion of reconfiguring that. And that's actually one of the places I would start is audit your supply chain and see, how can you either work with your existing suppliers to improve working conditions, labor practices. There are so many groups out there, certifications, et cetera. Work with them. Don't put all of the cost on your suppliers. Work with your suppliers, help them get the training they need. Speaking of Patagonia, they have a lot of resources on that. They helped develop some fair labor standards that are available on their website and some other stuff that they have available. So supply chain's like this other big kind of behemoth that's just, if you're a Fortune 500 firm and you have this supply chain in place, you've worked over time to develop relationships with suppliers. And you can't just pick up and go and move somewhere else. But that's actually why it might be the better place to start.
Well, and right now we've seen what happened with the pandemic, and the global supply chain just came to a halt. Yeah. And there is a lot of brokenness and not a lot of resiliency in that system. And that came to light in a big way. And we're still experiencing the effects of that. A lot of our clients are struggling because they can't get product to sell because their suppliers can't get their raw materials. And, I think the whole supply chain situation needs to be looked at for lots of reasons.
Yes. Yeah. And we can talk as well later if now's not the best timing of it, but about methods and tools that help improve resiliency of supply chains.
Yeah.
In a more
we should talk about
way.
that. And that'll be like a whole nother, I think, sequel to this.
Yeah.
Let's jump into that in a minute. But what's an example of a publicly traded corporation that you think, is making a good faith effort? You mentioned Apple already, but who's had a sustainable impact on their outcomes?
Well, I actually, funny enough, go to PepsiCo. So if you're familiar with Social-ecological Systems, it's a consulting firm. They actually, one of the services they do is they rate publicly traded corporations, and PepsiCo comes out as number one.
Huh.
And it's in part, I think, because they had a high bar to start with in terms of the impact of their plastic-based products and their carbon footprint. So it's already kind of a bad deal. But they've made a lot of changes to ameliorate that. Yeah. So they're using recycled plastic now. They're moving to bio-based plastic. I think they're maybe moving away from plastic back to aluminum. So lots of good materials there. Also contributing a lot to supporting nonprofits who work for maybe things not quite as related to beverages, but, they have lots of money. And so why not give some of that to nonprofits working with impoverished communities? I believe they have I think this is PepsiCo. It might be another company, but working with a nonprofit that distributes like miniature solar panels and solar lights.
Oh, cool.
Which has been shown to actually have one of the biggest impacts on improving communities because it provides light at night,
right?
Which improves safety, which improves everything else. It also improves access to be able to read at night and like all of these ways that, so PepsiCo is, I think, the company I'm thinking of that is actually donating a lot of money to fund those projects.
Cool.
Yeah. So, and I would hope that they're, a beverage company selling sugary drinks, I would hope that they're also like doing something for health, but yeah, I don't know. Yeah. We'll do some research and find out if they're doing that.
Yeah. Now, what about, medium-sized, small, medium-sized business? If I'm an owner of let's say 200 million a year manufacturing, maybe it's been in the family a couple generations. What are some examples of businesses like that, you've seen some practices that have really had an impact on their performance, but also on just their sustainability outcomes?
Well, a couple of B Corp companies that I talked to were in, I think, that range. And one was not a manufacturer. One was a software development company. And one was, I think it was maybe a law firm, actually. So they weren't product manufacturers, come to think of it. So let me think of another example.
Yeah, those are fine too. But I mean, like the scale, like I'm really, because that's where like if you're the owner or you're the executive leadership team of that company, which that's usually big enough that you've got a functioning executive leadership team. What are the types of conversations, the types of decisions that typically are on the table that are meaningful?
Well, these companies, one of them talked about that they were kind of a tier below that top leadership. And so they had a really good position because, they could access the frontline workers and work with them and get to know them. And then also have the ear of the C-suite type leadership, and really just wanted to see their company do more. We're a software development company. We meet a lot of people. We work with a lot of people. We design applications for them. And so their push was to go get a B Corp certification. And that would then retrofit, like they could find ways through the certification to retrofit in ways that made sense for their business model. So it was more about getting leadership on board that this was going to be a good idea. Yeah. And mainly because, hey, think of all, the PR, we're going to be a software development company that's a B Corp, this is going to be really great for us and our company in terms of attracting more consumers that care about that, and employees that do as well, reduce turnover, that kind of thing. And so that's how they did it. Another company eventually did get B Corp certification, but that was after they made the push, kind of also to retrofit. And they just decided that, this was the owner manager of this company. I'm the leader here. Yeah. This is my, the impact of this company I'm responsible for. And so they just started reaching out to other companies, not necessarily competitors, not necessarily people in the same space as them, but just other companies who they saw that had that kind of mission. Right. And just made friends and learned and just started experimenting with things. I think what they did well is they just tried a few things. They didn't try and overhaul their entire business all at once. Yeah. They kind of did an assessment of where the major gaps were in terms of their own, because again, they didn't seek out B Corp certification yet. It was in terms of their own business model, product, all of it, how they talk about it. and think about it, identified gaps in that way, and just started, trying this one. Oh, okay, success. Okay, now we're gonna try this other thing, And so I think by tackling these small chunks, they built the wave that eventually they were like, oh, hey, we should go get a B Corp certification because I think we'd qualify. And sure enough, they did.
Yeah.
Right. We're already doing the things. Why not take it a step further and get certified?
Yeah.
I love that. So I've heard you talk, Brooke, about, taking lessons from nature and looking at nature and natural systems and applying that to ways of organizing business. And you use the term social-ecological systems and a social-ecological systems view of organizing. Tell us about that. What does that mean?
Yes. So that is the formal term that ecologists use. So that's the term I use in my, academic literature. It basically means that we take from the earth and we put back into the earth.
Okay.
We cannot separate social and ecological systems from one another. We as humans benefit from what we call ecosystem services, air, water, agricultural products, trees. We could not be alive as humans without what the earth provides us. Businesses would not have raw materials to do anything with. Everything comes from nature.
Yeah.
From, in some way, shape, or form. Plastic even comes from nature. So we rely on these ecosystem services. We also, in the past, and this is where I, as an undergrad, became a little disenchanted with economics because, there's a lot's been done, nothing against economics, but we would just call the waste products. We'd stop at like, oh, we're going to produce a product or service and we're going to sell it to the consumer. It's out of our sphere of responsibility. But that's not what happens. A product exists on Earth after a company sells it.
Yeah.
For however long, maybe short, maybe a long time. Consumers may use something even for only an hour, but then it ends up in a landfill and sits for 100 years, putting in a plastic bottle or something. It could be a washing machine that consumers can use for 25 years or however long washing machines are used. And then that goes to a landfill or is recycled. So we can't count those as externalities. Like who's responsible for that waste?
Yeah.
Who's responsible for the carbon emissions, and the water pollution? So that's very simply put, a social-ecological system is the idea that anything social, humans, companies, economies, societies are embedded on planet Earth, and we have these hard boundaries. Planet Earth operates in a particular way. We cannot control that.
There are finite resources.
Yep. Even renewable resources have a regeneration rate that we need to stay above.
Yeah.
So they can regenerate.
Takes 30 years to grow a pine tree, things like that.
Yes.
Yep.
If we overfish, the fish cannot repopulate. No more fish, So the whole idea that we're, myself and some other people in business research are looking at is how do we work with nature instead of just kind of taking it for granted and forgetting about our raw materials and our waste.
So it's interesting. We talk about different ways that, businesses can run an extraction model or they can run a model that's sustainable. And we talk about the people practices and the people systems, right, of a business. So I think this is a really interesting analogy to that, right? Are we running an extraction model where we're extracting as many resources out of the earth and not caring about what happens to that? Or are we putting something back in of equal or greater value into the system?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's actually where my work on social enterprise and organizational culture fits in, is it's actually just, it's a mindset that people need to adopt and just have kind of in the back of their mind at all times, filter all decision-making through, is this the right product? How do we develop a more circular model? How do we partner with companies that can help us be a more circular type of company? And circular, of course, I mean designing for reassembly, reuse, recycling. So what is the end of life going to look like? Are we designing the product at the beginning of that to be able to be disassembled, repurposed, reused, recycled, whatever.
Yeah.
And Nike has fabulous resources on that. I use them in my classes. They have a whole workbook, actually. It's a little bit tailored to the apparel industry, but really a lot of the, they have a 50-page workbook. I think most of the questions you could work through it and find things that are really useful.
Cool.
And so that's the type, and if that's the type of thing that if you just have this mindset that yes, I really raw materials come from somewhere. There's a regeneration rate that I really need to be aware of. I need to maybe work with an ecologist or maybe learn from somebody who knows something about these natural systems. That's where I'm going in my research currently, is how could companies work with, let's say, ecologists or regional experts, because that's really important.
Yeah.
We can't expect companies to do it all, but there are people who dedicate their lives to this, who have a lot of knowledge about how ecosystems work and what happens with raw material extraction, what happens when you put waste back into the earth. So leverage their expertise. You don't have to do it all on your own. Work with a consultant, work with, at MSU, we have an extension service. All land grant institutions have an extension service, and their job is to bring research to the public and translate it for the public. So, contact your extension agent, or lots of ways that we're currently trying to articulate about how companies could understand ecological systems in ways that they internalize, and then it becomes a mindset that they filter all their decision making through. And I think that companies could really do a lot more. I mean, this is something I haven't thought about until, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, because of a research project I was working on. And I don't know, I could keep talking, but I don't know if you have more questions.
Well, I mean, you mentioned mindset, and that's the theme I see through all of this. So whether it's the ecological outcomes of your company, or what we mostly talk about on this podcast, which is the human outcomes of your organization, meaningful work, quality of life, retention, career building, leadership development opportunities for people, whatever it is you're talking about, it's this idea that I, as a leader, am responsible for my outcomes. And as we grow in our leadership, the circle of what we're responsible for and what we really need to notice and be aware of just grows wider and wider and wider. And what I think we see happening culturally, and what I hear you talking about in your research, is really this understanding that kind of see no evil means it doesn't exist. That's outside my value stream. I'm not responsible for it. People have seen that that's kind of a hollow way to do business. It doesn't hold water. I can't dump my trash on my next door neighbor's yard every day and then just pretend like it doesn't exist. But people do that ecologically, as you've said, but also, with the human cost of their business. I think about, I heard a story, read an article about Facebook content moderators, right? So Indonesia, pay someone whatever it is, $3 an hour, I don't know the numbers, to basically watch child abuse and torture and all sorts of horrible things as a Facebook content moderator, right? So anytime anyone flags something as inappropriate, it goes to a content moderator. A real person has to look at it and then say, yes, this content is fine, it doesn't go against our policies, or no, this goes against our policies, it needs to be flagged, and then IA will hopefully catch it whenever it resurfaces. But there's people that are paid in third world countries to watch the most horrible outcomes of the human race for hours and hours every day. And what does that do to somebody? And to say that that's an acceptable function of a business, I think takes quite a stretch. And I use that example because it is so extreme, right? None of us would want our kids to have that job.
Right.
But we need to think about that in our own context. So who am I leading? What am I responsible for? What's the work that people are doing? And then, as we've been discussing, what are the consequences to my community, to the wider, planet that I live on? And taking that ownership mindset where I'm an owner of everything that I touch and every system that I'm a part of. is a shift. And I think people avoid it because they're busy, right? And they haven't been trained to think that way. And they've really been trained to like, I'm going to look at the P&L, I'm going to look at our turnover numbers, right? I'm managing the outcomes instead of managing the system that's creating the outcomes.
That's a great example. It's a terrible example, but it's a good example of how actually, if you take the social ecological off, just the systems mindset is a way that to become aware of what are you responsible for.
Yeah.
Because the systems effect shows you, we think about this other way of thinking about unintended consequences. It's not really unintended. Like if you had thought ahead and seen the connections, you would have, seen that this is actually a possibility.
Yeah.
Like, okay, if I have somebody watch terrible videos for hours on end every day, like, okay, it's 90% likely that they're going to have a mental health crisis, or something like that. 10% likely they won't. That's odd, but but you would think through those outcomes.
Yeah.
And that's actually where a lot of my research is going now, but more from a social ecological point of view, but is using a systems perspective to map either within an organization with culture and formal structures or between organizations at a collective level. If we think about this, about how everything's connected, we can actually start to look at the possible outcomes. We can't predict anything, but we could assign probabilities.
Yeah.
And then we can plan for those. So it's a little bit like scenario planning, which Shell is really famous for.
Yeah.
And we've taught in strategy for a long time. But this is a little bit more of a system scenario planning where you're saying so an example is how to make your supply chains more resilient is if you engage in systems thinking, coupling the social and ecological, you start to see, okay, well, I have a lot of distribution centers in Florida. That's a hurricane, mecca. And then you start to look at the factors involved and you start to plan for hurricanes and build in resilience for hurricanes instead of just like, oh no, there was a hurricane, let's react and clean up, or a pandemic or pick what disruption you want to choose. But if you're looking at where you're operating, who you're operating with, and you start to put together all the pieces, you can start to think about like, okay, yeah, this is a possible outcome. It's maybe 85% possible. So we should have a plan in place for that, and of course that's a lot of work, but it is cool. And it will actually make your company more resilient to do something like that. Inside an organization, it's going to make your company very resilient to think about like, what are the practices we have in place? Is this workload okay for people? Is the type of work they're doing? Do they feel like they're actually contributing to something that's meaningful to them? Because we have a lot of research showing the more meaning people can attach to their roles, the more resilient they're going to be psychologically and enjoy their work. So how can you foster that? Like thinking about all those things can help you identify what we call leverage points, which is like the place where if you make a change, it has the biggest effect. It kind of ripples out and has the biggest effect.
Yeah.
Maybe that's as simple as, actually giving your employees the vacation days that you promise, or whatever it is that helps them stay resilient.
So how is a social ecological systems view of organizing different from other ways of thinking about organizations? So kind of where we started and talked a little bit about earlier, where you have this spectrum of companies that like the ones that are further away from the impact model or social enterprise model, they tend to be thinking very, very short term. Yeah.
They tend to be thinking very linearly. So because they have to deliver on quarterly returns to their shareholders.
Yeah. And that's one of the biggest challenges with publicly traded corporations, right? It's all about the quarterly return, which means we're only thinking 3 months out.
Yes.
How can we extract the most amount of profit for 3 months?
Yes. And it, again, not that they're bad, it's the infrastructure they're working within. But that does tend to lend itself to kind of missing a lot of the effects of their work and attaching responsibility to that beyond a 3-month time span. It narrows the point of view as to what is actually performance. It's just the shareholder returns. Yeah. If you take a longer time horizon, you can then account for employee resilience, positive impacts on your community. A lot of those things just take a little while longer to emerge and foster.
And those have monetary value.
Yes, they do.
So, I mean, I think, there's a reason we're purpose and performance group, right? All of those things have outcomes that are positive if the time horizon is long enough. And sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to make that point that it's not just rainbows and unicorns, like, hey, we should think longer and how do we create meaningful work? If we take away the constraint of some sort of immediate return, it becomes much more possible to find the win-wins that I think, high character leaders are always looking for.
Win-win is a great term because that's really what you're trying to accomplish. And it will take a little longer to get there, but it also takes just a slower growth model. If you're constantly trying to grow and beat your competitors and maximize your returns, then you're always looking at the shortest term, like, fire to put out or consumer trend or whatever it is. And you're not, maybe you're investing in your employees, maybe, I don't know if you are as much as you could be. But yeah, if you extend your time horizon, you can slow down a bit. You can really assess what matters. You can put the right building blocks in place. You can foster the right kinds of things that will grow and lead to better things. And then, yes, you will probably be more stable and competitive in a different way than just profit maximizing. You're going to have like a stable employee base. You're going to have, stable consumer base. You're going to have products and services that people care about and want to support. And so you may not make you might, but I don't know, Patagonia is a funny example, but they didn't want to grow and then they grew because people loved that mission, right? So that's kind of a funny example.
And they've become incredibly profitable. But back to the first example, they use a lot of that profit to fund projects that help the environment because that is in their purpose, in their mission.
Yes. And back to Luke's point about it's not just puppies and rainbows and unicorns and everything. It's like, this is actually very strategic. And if you look at it from a longer term perspective, then, getting those consumers on board that align with your mission, getting the right employees in, you're competing against your competitors, and that's in a different way. Oftentimes it's more of a differentiation niche kind of strategy, if familiar with that term. And so you're differentiating yourself based on your impact or your purpose. And if you think about it, what's more unique than your purpose? It's pretty unique and hard to mimic for other companies. So it all feeds in, it creates a positive feedback loop, really. And so it is very strategic. It's just, fighting against the short-term mindset. I think that's the hardest part because that's so built into our society, economy.
We've been conditioned to think in quarterly increments, right? And so we've been touching on kind of the why throughout this last few minutes here. If you were to kind of summarize, like, why does it matter? Why should leaders be thinking this way? Versus traditional ways of looking at organizations?
I teach in business school and I teach the future business leaders. They want companies. They want to run companies like this. They want to work for companies like this. I teach very smart, intelligent, hardworking, motivated students, and they want to be at companies that have a purpose, that have an impact. They want to be working for something. They don't just want to go earn a paycheck 9 to 5 and go home. They have passion. So, work, if you want to get the right kinds of employees, that they are there. If you can articulate your mission and your purpose, then they will come.
And that is so powerful because, we've had this whole series of episodes on the Great Resignation as so many companies are struggling to find workers, to find employees, right? In some industries, it's not a problem, but service industry, a lot of different types of jobs, people are really, really struggling to find people who want to work, who are motivated, right? And so it's just really interesting to think about, like, what, as we have to, as business leaders and business owners have to shift our thinking, employment as a product. That is one of the things that we sell is employment. How do we make employment attractive? And what you just touched on, that's what people care about. That's what young people coming up in college are looking for. If we can provide what they want, we can create much more healthy, sustainable, profitable businesses.
Yes. Yeah. And that's the other why. Well, there's a couple other whys, but one is, so the same students that are going to be your employees, they're also the harbinger of consumers. And, there's obviously a lot of different kinds of consumers out there. But the trends I'm seeing in the students I'm teaching, and I've been teaching for 12 years, and more and more and more. Yeah. I'm hearing this every year. Yeah. Business schools are starting more programs in this area because that's what students want. And that's, that's what we sell, that quote unquote, is, we have to keep up with what's relevant to the business world. And we should be a little ahead of that to prepare the workforce. But consumers want transparency. They want accountability. And they will vote with their dollars. Yeah. And we're seeing that. It's not a tidal wave quite yet, but it's coming.
It's a groundswell.
Yes,
well,
it's a groundswell.
I think the tipping point of the Great Resignation, reshuffle, whatever we want to call it, does that not tell us that there's probably a consumer tipping point coming as well that's going to demand the same things from organizations? So I think this idea that the trends are going to change is, well, sure, maybe in 50 years, but probably not in the next 20. Right. So we better get on board with being a purpose-driven organization.
Yeah. And the last why I'll offer is, I've talked to a lot of, in my qualitative interview type research, a lot of business owners who have impact-driven companies or purpose-driven companies, and it's sustaining for them. So if you're pouring yourself into this work, how are you having, I'm responsible for this and I'm actually doing something about it. Yeah. It's sustaining for an entrepreneur or an owner of a company. Even in my own world as an academic, I'm overloaded with work, and I have way too much work most of the time. But I remember my purpose, and that, I'm, doing this because I'm trying to help our new, workforce, business leaders, have find their own impact. And that's very sustaining for me at the times when I feel overloaded. Yeah. So I can, and then I see that in owners of startups and entrepreneurs all the time. They talk about that as well. Having that meaning for themselves, very important.
Yeah. And I just want to do maybe this is a tangent and we probably don't have time for it, but
I'm going to do it anyway.
Well, as an owner of a purpose-driven company, we still don't have a lot of systems set up for purpose-driven companies, startups especially. And so I'm saying that partly from my own experience, partly from just observing and talking to lots of other folks. So shifting the way that startups happen, are funded, the support that they have in the ecosystem, I think is going to be a big project over the next 20, 30 years. I don't know. I say that as a question. Well, I said that like it was a statement, but I'm really curious your opinion on that.
That's where actually my recent article and a couple more papers coming from that stream looking at the context in which social enterprise and purpose-driven companies unfolds is actually really important. Because, are there the right kinds of resources out there? And our most recent paper found that it's actually some of the supportive mechanisms for these purpose-driven companies are a little bit different than what we would think of for traditional companies. So yes, they need access to funding, financing, all of that. Finding, banks or venture capital or whatever level of funding it is you need that believes in impact-driven, purpose-driven companies, that's vital. Yeah, because they get it. Longer term, this is going to be a longer term return on investment. Yeah, but they're generating value that's more sustaining. That's more stable. It's gonna be a better investment in the long run. I also just think that this company's having a positive impact, and I like that. Again, we come back to how it's good for positive psychologically for people who engage in this work. And then we also find that a lot of these entrepreneurs who want to have purpose-driven companies, impact-driven companies, need to connect with other entrepreneurs doing the same work. The longer term horizons, the different kinds of obstacles, figuring out how to make a profit while also having an impact, all of these things are challenging. And so just having we call it socio-emotional wealth. So you need the financial wealth. You also need socio-emotional wealth.
Yeah.
And maybe that's a local group that you meet up with for coffee. Maybe it's a more formal group that you like learn about stuff. I don't know. It's whatever works for you. In another study, I talked to people about the B Corp certification being that for them because they have the B local groups that they can go have drinks with, coffee with.
Yeah.
And just, they don't even need to talk about their own businesses. They just need to kind of vent a little bit, cry a little bit. Okay, I'm ready to go back to it. And connect, And so those are two things that come to mind that are just a little different. And also think about the community you're working within. Are there other firms doing this same kind of work? Are you the only one? If you're the only one, you might have to educate consumers a little bit more than if there are other companies kind of doing the same, not same thing, but purpose-driven, impact-driven.
Yeah.
People are already kind of familiar with your business model. It's a little easier to just kind of start your company. If you're in, I don't know, trying to think of somewhere that, no one would know what you're talking about. They'll be like, huh, are you a nonprofit?
Right.
Are you a for-profit?
Yeah.
I don't really get it.
Yep.
So as we wrap up this conversation, Brooke, this has been really interesting. And thank you for sharing your expertise with us. What are some tips that you would share with leaders in organizations of how to foster more nature-based organizational cultures?
Yeah. So I think there's quite a few things you can do. If you are a product manufacturing company, you could engage in a life cycle analysis of your products. You get the right, with any of this, you need to be in organizational culture involving a diversity of like a cross section of your employees in the change. Yeah. It may be a small change. It may be a big change. It might be a series of small changes, but you get frontline workers in there from engineering, get leaders in from engineering, get frontline workers from, sales, and make sure they're the right kind of people. Make sure they have some social capital inside the organization. Yeah. They have some trust. They have good relationships. And then the work might be a little slow at first, but, with leadership giving them some help, but not kind of dictating what they should do, you'll start to see this like groundswell turn into this really amazing effort. And so, the life cycle analysis could be useful for that kind of group to engage in on a product that basically identifies from raw materials all the way to end of life of a product, where are the most material impacts? Yeah. And you can actually outsource that. There are firms that do that for you. But that gives you the awareness of the impact that your products have on this earth. What social impacts are they having? What environmental impacts are they having? What economic impacts are they having? A life cycle analysis is a fantastic way to find out the social and environmental, gaps or risks that you have. Yeah. Also, where you could be saving money in some of these places. Like if you think about the entire lifespan of a product, you start to identify lots of different areas for innovation that you might not otherwise think of. So that's for an environmental firm. As much as you can, going circular and having your cross section of employees helping you figure out how to do that, whether that's your carbon neutral or your zero waste or however you want to put it, or your social impact. Of course, how well we're doing with the environment clearly impacts our well-being as people who need to breathe the air and drink the water. So. And then for a services company, engaging in some systems thinking and thinking about what are the network of suppliers and partners that we're working with to provide our service. Are they on board with potentially helping us have our entire footprint be, adopting that as part of your responsibility? And are they on board with helping us improve? What are our downstream effects? How consumers are, what are the outcomes of them using our service? Yeah. And then thinking about how you can measure that, because I heard somebody say this the other week and I love it. What gets measured matters. Yeah. And so kind of putting, kind of doing the systems view of your upstream and downstream work as a services company, and then putting metrics in place, just helps you get, first of all, a sense of what's what, and then you can start to tweak and change work there. But I think for the culture, it's really that social ecological systems mindset that we cannot take for granted natural resources. We cannot just, like, waste just doesn't disappear,
right?
Because I put the plastic bottle in the recycling bin. Like, that has to go somewhere, and it has continuing effects.
Yeah.
And whether you're a products company or a services company, that's going to just, again, you can filter your decision making through that. In terms of organizational culture with that kind of mindset, training would help. Like, you don't have to use that particular word, but some way to show, like, we care as a company, we care about our footprint on this earth. And here's what we're doing. If you'd like to get involved, here's how you can.
And we would say the methodology there is a clear shared purpose and then clear commitments. So rather than here are our values, stewardship,
we
whatever.
Put them in a binder or maybe even on the wall, but
right. But it's really behavioralized.
Yeah.
Maybe we do believe in stewardship, but that means these 5 behaviors, and you might have to do workshopping around what are those 5 behaviors for each function of the business. So it really has to get into behaviorally, how do we live out what we believe? And then how does that get integrated into our talent attraction, selection, onboarding, training, performance management programs?
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. I think it's really important not to just say, the words.
Yeah.
We value nature.
Right.
It's like,
and
how do you value nature?
And that's what we're
what are you
passionate
doing?
about, right? Is operationalizing purpose. What does it mean? We say we have this purpose. How do we live that out? What impact does it have? How does it change the outcomes of our business? But it starts with behavioral commitments. We commit to do these things, and that's who we are, right? That's our identity, and that's our lifestyle, and that's how we live out our purpose every day. So this has been an awesome conversation. I really appreciate you being here, Brooke. Luke, any final thoughts or key takeaways you want to share as we wrap up?
No, I mean, I just leave with this idea that, like, we all have to take responsibility for the outcomes of our business, whether that's an employee leaving and having had a bad experience, or whether that's physical waste that we're responsible for, and that it takes work. But also the encouraging piece is all the trending is moving towards this. And, my word of caution to people who are in maybe taking a more traditional view of their enterprise is that, yes, it does take longer for these purpose-centric behaviors to have payoffs. But once they do, I think the markets are going to flip really quickly. And the people who haven't started that 10-year transformation change management, journey are not going to be able to make the change in a year. It really does take time to bake in the oven, to really have things rise and do transformation. And so, my encouragement is, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time is today. So find a way to move forward.
Yeah, I agree. All the best formal policies in place are, going to get you so far, but having an organizational culture that supports the behaviors, that's going to be the best way to actually achieve your purpose and impact. And that's going to take your 20 years or 10 years to actually really get there.
Yeah. And
the last thing I'll say is, what I often hear from students or business owners who want to have an impact is, well, I'm trying so hard, and this change is so hard, and it's like overwhelming, and I keep failing. And it's like, first of all, failure's okay.
Yeah.
Try again.
Yeah.
Yep.
Some of this is just experimentation because, even if you become a B Corp or whatever, it's so dependent on what your company's identity is, what your company's purpose is. So you've got to experiment a bit and find what's right for you. So failure is going to happen, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And we'll all
Start
fail,
small. Yeah.
but we get to choose what we're going to fail at, right?
Yeah.
We get to choose the challenges we face. Do I choose to face the challenges that come with a life of being a courageous leader that enables and supports and drives transformation? Because that's a really hard road to walk. Or am I going to choose the challenges that come with trying to maintain and extract as much profitability as possible in an old model? And then that's going to bring challenges too.
Yeah.
There's no challenge-free path. So we have to be, and don't have to be. We get the choice to be intentional about what challenges we're going to take on.
Yeah. So, Brooke, if people want to learn more, where can they find your research? How can they connect with you?
So the easiest way is to find me on the Montana State faculty directory.
Yeah.
And my email's there, links to my personal website, links to my research. Google Scholar page is there. And my contact information is all there as well.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. Luke.
Thank you for having me. This is fun.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Yeah. And if you are a courageous leader who want to explore how to create a more organic way of doing business and a more nature-based way of organizing, we can help you with that. It starts with getting clear on what your purpose is, what your values are, how you create commitments to those values and operationalize that purpose. You can find us at purposeandperformancegroup.com, and we are on most of the social media channels. So reach out if you want to talk more.
Magic in the Room is hosted by Chris Province, Hannah Bratterud and Luke Freeman, and produced by Ben West. Theme music is by Evan Grimm. Title track Fake Love available on Apple Music, and this podcast was recorded at Storycatcher Studio with video and audio editing and production support by Brad O'Hara and Alicia Crum, with inspiration, strategy and technical support by yours truly, Neil Hughes. Magic in the Room is a production of Purpose and Performance Group. You can find us at purposeandperformancegroup.com, and remember, previous episodes are available at magicintheroom.com.